What if I told you that almost everything you fear doesn't actually exist? That the sleepless nights, the anxiety before that big decision, the constant whisper in your mind that says, "What if it goes wrong?" are not reflections of the world, but projections of your own thoughts. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Imagine that. The Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth, understood something that most of us in the 21st century have completely forgotten: that fear is not an enemy to be defeated, but a shadow to be understood. And in this video, you're going to discover the 3 Stoic principles that can make you fear nothing in life. But before we dive into those, I want you to stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see fear in a way you've never seen it before. Let me open a small loop here, because this story doesn't start with ancient Rome, but with a modern man, just like you and me. He's sitting in his car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the parking lot of the building where his dream job interview is about to happen. His heart is racing. His palms are sweating. He's rehearsing every answer he's memorized. He's terrified, not of failure, not of rejection, but of being seen. Because deep down, like most of us, he fears that he is not enough, that he'll be exposed as a fraud, that someone will finally see through the illusion of competence he's been trying so hard to maintain. And yet, what he doesn't know, what you might not know yet, is that the Stoics had a way to destroy that illusion completely, to face life's toughest tests with a calm mind and unshakable confidence. You see, fear is not a signal of weakness, it's a compass. It points directly to the things that matter most to you: your ambitions, your attachments, your identity. Epictetus, once a slave, taught that we suffer not from the things that happen to us, but from our opinions about them. Think about that. 2 people can experience the same situation. One sees a challenge, the other sees catastrophe. The only difference is the lens they're looking through. The Stoics mastered that lens. And that's what we're going to unpack, because these 3 principles, once understood, will not just make you fearless, they'll make you dangerously calm in the face of anything. But before we talk about those principles, we need to understand the trap. The modern mind is built to fear everything. The world constantly feeds you stories of danger. The news, social media, people comparing their lives to yours. Every scroll, every notification reinforces one poisonous idea: that something is missing, that you're behind, that you're not safe. And the Stoics, if they lived today, would look at our world and laugh. Because what we call stress or anxiety is just ancient fear dressed in new clothes. Marcus Aurelius dealt with wars, plagues, and betrayal, yet he woke up every morning with the same calm conviction: today, I shall meet people who are ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, but I will not be harmed by them. He didn't say that because he was naive. He said that because he had trained his mind to remain sovereign, unshaken by the chaos around him. Now here's where it gets interesting. Fear is a teacher disguised as an enemy. When you learn to listen to it instead of fighting it, it shows you exactly where you need to grow. That's the first open loop we'll close later in this video: how to transform fear into your teacher. But to do that, you must first understand the ancient Stoic concept of control, the foundation of every fearless life. Imagine standing in a storm. You can't stop the rain, you can't control the wind, but you can control how you walk through it. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, separating what you can control from what you cannot. The modern mind, however, confuses the two constantly, wasting energy on the uncontrollable and ignoring the one thing it can always command: your own judgment. Let me tell you a quick story about James Stockdale, an American pilot shot down during the Vietnam War. When his plane was destroyed and he parachuted into enemy territory, he knew he was about to face years of torture and imprisonment. But before his feet even touched the ground, he remembered something he'd read from Epictetus: you have power over your mind, not outside events. For 7 years in captivity, he refused to see himself as a victim. He couldn't control the beatings, the darkness, the isolation, but he could control how he interpreted them. And that's what kept him alive. That's Stoicism in its purest form. The ability to remain free in a situation where everything else is taken from you. And that's the paradox you must hold on to. Fear disappears when control is reclaimed. The less you try to control the uncontrollable, the more powerful you become. The more you focus on mastering your own perception, the less external chaos can touch you. It's not about pretending fear doesn't exist. It's about realizing that fear is just energy, raw, untamed power, waiting to be directed. The Stoics didn't aim to eliminate fear, they aimed to master it. And once you master it, it becomes your servant, not your master. So here's the promise of this video. By the end, you won't just understand these 3 Stoic principles, you'll feel them reshaping the way you think. You'll start to see how Marcus Aurelius faced death without trembling, how Seneca accepted loss with grace, and how Epictetus turned slavery into freedom. But before we open that first principle, let's pause and ask the question that will unlock everything. What are you really afraid of? Because once you can answer that, the rest of your life begins.
Here's a truth that hits like a hammer. You cannot control the world, but you can always control your response to it. This is the first Stoic principle that dissolves fear at its root, the dichotomy of control. It sounds simple, but when you truly grasp it, your entire reality shifts. Most people think freedom means being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want. But the Stoics knew the opposite. True freedom is wanting only what you can control. That's why most people live in invisible cages, not built by walls, but by their own reactions. Every time you get angry at something you can't change, every time you worry about someone else's opinion, you hand over a piece of your power. Imagine that. Every complaint, every panic, every argument over something you can't control is like giving away a part of your soul. Let's open another loop here, because I'm going to show you later how this principle, when applied, can make you immune to manipulation, heartbreak, and even failure. But first, I want to show you why this principle is so difficult to practice. The modern world runs on your fear of losing control. Think about it. The news wants you to fear the economy. Companies want you to fear missing out. Social media wants you to fear being irrelevant. You are constantly being pulled into things you cannot control, and the more attention you give them, the more powerless you feel. That's not an accident. That's the system. The Stoics, however, lived by a single internal rule: focus only on what's within your power. So, what exactly is within your power? Epictetus answered this clearly. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. What's up to you? Your judgments, your choices, your emotions, your actions. What's not? Everything else. The weather, the stock market, other people's opinions, the past, the future, all of it lies outside your control. But the mind, clever as it is, constantly tries to play God. It obsesses over what-ifs and should-haves. It tries to rewrite events that have already happened or predict outcomes that never will. That's where fear is born, in the gap between what is and what we wish it was. Let me illustrate this with a story. Imagine a surfer waiting for a wave. The ocean is unpredictable. The waves are never under his control. He can't command them to rise or calm, but he can master how he rides them. That's life. The Stoics are surfers of existence. They don't fight the current, they ride it with grace. When the wave crashes, they fall, get up, and paddle again, because the sea owes them nothing. Fear fades when you stop expecting the ocean to obey you. Let's bring this to real life. You send a text to someone you care about. They see it, but they don't reply. Your mind immediately fills in the blanks. Did I say something wrong? Did I lose them? Do they not care? But none of that is real. What's real is that you sent a message. What's not in your control is when or how they respond, yet most of your suffering comes from trying to control that second part. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every morning, you have power over your mind, not outside events. The moment you understand this, really understand it, your anxiety starts to fade because you stop fighting reality and start mastering yourself. Here's a psychological twist. Studies in behavioral science show that anxiety spikes when humans believe they have control, but don't. For example, in an experiment, people were asked to press a button that sometimes stopped a loud noise. They weren't told that the button did nothing. Yet those who believed they had control experienced less stress, even though the outcome never changed. Why? Because the human brain is wired to crave agency. The Stoics used that wiring to their advantage by focusing their sense of control inward where it's never taken away. No matter what the world throws at you, your mind remains your fortress. And let's be honest, life will test you. You'll lose people, plans will fall apart, opportunities will slip through your fingers. But if you master this first principle, you'll meet every storm with composure. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." The Stoic doesn't deny pain, he simply refuses to add unnecessary suffering on top of it. That's emotional alchemy, turning fear into awareness, chaos into calm. Now, I want you to picture something. You're standing in the middle of your life's battlefield. Everything around you is noise, people judging you, outcomes uncertain, time slipping. You take a deep breath, close your eyes, and whisper, "What is up to me right now?" The moment you answer that question honestly, you cut through fear like a blade through fog. Because fear loses its power when clarity enters the room. The Stoics called this autoroxia, a state of unshakable tranquility. It's not about ignoring problems, it's about mastering your perception so deeply that problems no longer control your peace. But here's the catch. Knowing the principle is not enough. The Stoics weren't armchair philosophers, they practiced this daily. Marcus wrote in his journal not for others, but to remind himself. Epictetus told his students to make progress, not speeches. So if you truly want to live this, you must practice what the Stoics practiced, the morning separation. Every morning, before you face the world, separate what you can control from what you can't. Write it down. Decide where your energy goes. That small act, done daily, rewires your mind over time. Slowly, your anxiety dissolves, your confidence strengthens, and you stop being a puppet to external chaos. Now keep this in mind, because this first principle connects directly to the second, and it's the one that separates the ordinary from the unbreakable. The next principle goes deeper. It's not about control anymore. It's about perspective, how you see what happens to you. Because once you've learned to control your inner world, the next step is learning how to interpret the outer one. And that, my friend, is where true fearlessness begins.
You don't see the world as it is, you see it as you are. That's the second Stoic principle, and it's one that rewires everything about how you experience fear. The Stoics believed that nothing has meaning until the mind assigns it one. Think about that for a moment. Events themselves are neutral. Losing a job, a breakup, getting criticized, failing an exam. None of these carry built-in pain. They become painful when you decide they are. Seneca said, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." You might want to pause on that line because it reveals a hard truth. Your perception creates your suffering. If you change how you interpret something, you change what it means, and therefore you change what you feel. Let me tell you a story that perfectly captures this. A man named Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist, was imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps during World War II. He watched his family die. He was stripped of his freedom, his clothes, his name, everything. But he realized something profound. Even though they could control his body, they could never control his attitude. Frankl later wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That's Stoicism in its purest form. The Nazis could beat him, starve him, dehumanize him, but they could not touch his mind. That's the level of power perception can hold. It's the ultimate freedom, and it's the one that destroys fear from the inside out. Let's break that down psychologically. Your brain is a meaning-making machine. It constantly interprets the world through filters, your memories, beliefs, fears, and expectations. If your filter says, failure means I'm worthless, every setback will crush you. If your filter says, failure is feedback, every setback becomes a teacher. The Stoics knew this long before neuroscience proved it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." It's not the obstacle that decides your fate, it's your perception of it. That's what Stoic resilience truly means. Not the absence of hardship, but the mastery of interpretation. Let's open a loop here, because in a few minutes I'll show you how the Stoics trained their perception daily, like mental athletes, to remain calm even during disaster. But first, I want to challenge you to reflect. How many times in your life have you mistaken inconvenience for tragedy? You miss a flight, lose a deal, get rejected by someone, and your mind spirals. This is terrible. This ruins everything. But months later, you realize that event redirected your path towards something far better. How many times has something you feared turned out to be a blessing in disguise? That's the Stoic art of perception, to see reality not as punishment, but as preparation. Here's a modern story. In 2008, when the global economy collapsed, thousands of people lost their jobs. Some broke down completely, others used that crisis to reinvent themselves. One of them was a man named Brian Acton. He applied to Facebook for a job. They rejected him. Most people would have taken that as failure, but instead, he reframed it. "It's their loss," he said jokingly. 2 years later, he co-founded WhatsApp. Facebook then bought it for $19 billion. Same event, rejection. Different perception, destiny. The Stoics would have smiled at that, because Brian did what they trained their minds to do, to transform every insult, loss, or obstacle into fuel. Now let's get practical. How do you shift perception in real time? The Stoics practiced something called the view from above. It's a mental exercise where you imagine yourself rising above your situation, as if watching your life from the sky. You start small, visualizing your room, then your city, your country, and eventually the entire planet. From that vantage point, your problems shrink in scale. The thing that felt like the end of the world suddenly becomes microscopic in the vastness of existence. Marcus Aurelius used this often. In his meditations, he reminded himself to see things as they are, transient, small, and fleeting. When you zoom out like that, fear dissolves, because most fear lives in exaggeration, and perspective kills exaggeration. There's another technique, and this one is powerful. The Stoics called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Every morning, they would visualize the worst that could happen. They would imagine loss, failure, betrayal, even death, not to attract negativity, but to immunize their mind against it. When you've already faced the worst in your mind, the real thing loses its sting. It's like a vaccine for fear. Seneca said, "He who suffers before it is necessary, suffers more than necessary." By anticipating the worst, you steal fear's advantage, because fear feeds on surprise. Remove the element of surprise, and fear starves. Now, let's open another loop, because this practice, when done consistently, doesn't just make you calm, it makes you dangerous in the best way possible. Imagine being the person who stays centered when everyone else panics, who interprets chaos as opportunity, who doesn't react emotionally, but strategically. That's what happens when you master perception. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become the author of your experience. People around you will start to notice. They'll wonder why nothing seems to shake you anymore. And that's not arrogance, that's clarity. But remember this, changing perception isn't denial. It's not pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's seeing things as they are, not worse than they are. Fear exaggerates reality, Stoicism corrects it. When something goes wrong, you don't say, "This shouldn't have happened." You say, "It happened, now what can I do with it?" That small shift turns fear into focus. It's a rewiring of the emotional system, where instead of asking, "Why me?" you ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" So now we've covered two principles, control and perception. You've learned to stop fighting what you can't control and to change the meaning of what you can. But there's still one more, and it's the one that takes you beyond fear, beyond pain, beyond the fragile ego that clings to comfort. The third Stoic principle is what allowed Marcus Aurelius to face death with serenity, Seneca to face exile with peace, and Epictetus to face slavery with dignity. It's the principle that teaches you how to become indestructible. And in the next part, I'll show you exactly what it is and how to live it every single day.
Imagine living a life where nothing that happens can break you. Not loss, not failure, not betrayal, not even death. That's the promise of the third Stoic principle, amor fati, the love of fate. Not just acceptance, not tolerance, but love. To love everything that happens as necessary, as part of your destiny, as something meant for you, not to you. Most people hear that and think, how could I ever love the painful parts of life? But that's the misunderstanding. The Stoic doesn't love pain itself. He loves the opportunity that pain creates. He loves the strength it reveals, the wisdom it sharpens, the courage it demands. Amor fati is not passivity, it's active transformation. It's looking at the fire of life and saying, "Burn me if you must, but I will rise brighter." Let's open a loop here, because later in this video, I'll show you how this one mindset can make you unstoppable in relationships, business, and even your sense of purpose. But first, let's go back to where this principle was born. The Stoics lived in a world of uncertainty, wars, plagues, exile, betrayal. Yet they walked through it all with a strange serenity. Why? Because they trusted the universe's design. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything thrown into it." That's amor fati in action. The ability to take everything that happens, good or bad, and turn it into fuel. Nothing wasted, no event meaningless. Every obstacle becomes an ingredient in your evolution. Here's a modern example. In 2012, Stephen Hawking was asked how he kept his spirit alive despite his illness. He had been trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him, yet his mind roamed the cosmos. His answer? It doesn't matter what happens to you in life. What matters is how you respond. That's amor fati without the Latin. The disease didn't define him, his response did. The same applies to you, whether it's heartbreak, rejection, or failure. You can either curse fate or cooperate with it. The first path leads to resentment. The second leads to freedom. Think about your own story. Every hardship you've ever faced has shaped you. The things that once terrified you, the losses, the rejections, the disappointments, they didn't destroy you, they forged you. Every scar you carry is proof that you've survived your own mind. Amor fati invites you to see that survival as sacred. It asks you to stop wishing life were easier and start becoming the kind of person who can handle whatever comes. Because when you stop resisting reality, life stops feeling like an enemy. Here's a short story to make it real. A young athlete once tore his knee ligaments before the biggest competition of his career.
He was crushed. Months of training, gone in an instant. He spiraled. Anger, sadness, denial. But one day, his coach handed him a copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He read a single line: "Accept whatever comes to you, woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs." Something clicked. He decided to use his recovery to study mental performance, discipline, and patience. Years later, when he finally returned to competition, he not only won, he coached others, using what he learned in that downtime. That's amor fati, turning tragedy into transformation. The psychology behind this principle is stunning. Studies show that people who reframe negative experiences as meaningful report higher happiness, lower anxiety, and greater resilience. It's called cognitive reappraisal, a fancy modern term for an ancient Stoic practice. When you interpret pain as purpose, your brain releases less stress hormones and more dopamine. You literally rewire your emotional response to adversity. Amor fati isn't just philosophy, it's neuroscience in motion. The Stoics discovered centuries ago that what we call luck is often the residue of relentless acceptance. Let's open another loop, because later I'll share how amor fati can make you immune to regret. But first, let's test this principle in the toughest arena, loss. Seneca lost his son, his fortune, his position, yet he wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." That's hard to accept, but it's brutally true. Without loss, you'd never discover your depth. Without chaos, you'd never uncover your order. Amor fati says, let it all come, because everything serves me in the end. It's not optimism, it's realism. At its highest form, the belief that even pain has purpose. Now imagine what your life would look like if you truly lived this way. You lose a job. You say, good, now I'm free to find something better. Someone betrays you. Good, now I see their true nature. Plans fall apart. Good, the universe is redirecting me. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about mastering interpretation. You become unbreakable not because life gets easier, but because your mind no longer labels things as good or bad. Everything becomes neutral until you decide what meaning to give it. That's what makes the Stoic mind so rare. It doesn't demand a perfect world. It creates peace within an imperfect one. Let's tie this back to fear. Fear survives only when you resist what is. When you argue with reality, you suffer. But when you say, this too belongs, fear loses its fuel. Amor fati isn't just enduring what happens, it's embracing it so completely that you cannot be defeated. You don't flinch when life hits you. You absorb the impact, learn from it, and continue walking. When you can love your fate, even when it hurts, you transcend fear entirely. Because fear only controls those who still believe the universe is against them. The Stoic sees that the universe has never been against you. It has been shaping you. And this is where all three principles converge. Control teaches you to master your reactions, perception teaches you to shape your reality, and amor fati teaches you to love your journey. When combined, these three principles form a shield not against pain, but against despair. You stop fearing what might happen because you trust yourself to handle anything that does. That's true invincibility. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of unwavering faith in your ability to adapt. In the next part, we'll close the loop. We'll bring these three principles together and apply them to modern life, work, relationships, stress, and uncertainty. And by the end of it, you'll not only understand how to fear nothing, you'll know exactly how to live like someone who fears nothing.
Here's the truth. Philosophy that stays in the mind changes nothing. But philosophy that's lived, that's embodied, changes everything. The Stoics were not armchair thinkers, they were warriors of the mind. They didn't just write beautiful words, they lived them on the battlefield, in the Senate, in slavery, in sickness, and in the face of death. And now, if you want to truly fear nothing in life, you have to turn these three principles, control, perception, and amor fati, into daily habits. Because it's not what you know that frees you, it's what you practice. Let's start with the world most people live in today, the world of fear-driven distraction. Every notification, every breaking news headline, every post on your feed is a weapon designed to hijack your attention, to make you feel small, unsafe, and powerless. You scroll, you compare, you crave validation, and slowly your inner world becomes a battlefield you didn't even choose to enter. The Stoic mind doesn't live there. The Stoic mind is like a fortress, calm, centered, and deliberate. When the world screams, the Stoic whispers, "Is this within my control?" That question alone separates chaos from clarity. Imagine this scenario. You're at work and a colleague criticizes you in front of everyone. Instinctively, your heart races. Your mind starts constructing stories. They don't respect me. I'm humiliated. Everyone saw that. But stop. Right there. That's where you apply Principle 1. You can't control what they said. You can only control your response. You take a deep breath, stay composed, and respond with calmness. In that moment, you reclaim power. You've just won a battle most people lose every day, the battle of reaction. Now move to Principle 2, perception. Instead of replaying that moment and seeing it as an attack, you choose to reinterpret it. This is a test of my composure, a chance to practice strength. Instantly, the emotional charge shifts. You've taken what could have been humiliation and turned it into training. Every situation becomes a mental gym. Every challenge becomes resistance that builds emotional muscle. That's the secret. Perception is the training ground of strength. And then comes Principle 3, amor fati. Later that week, your boss decides to side with your critic. The promotion you wanted goes to someone else. Your ego feels bruised. You start doubting yourself. But the Stoic in you whispers, "This too is for me." Maybe that setback pushes you to start your own business. Maybe it forces you to refine your skills. Or maybe it's just life's way of humbling you before it elevates you. Either way, you love it. You embrace it. Because the Stoic knows that the universe is not cruel, it's corrective. And every correction carries wisdom. Let's open a powerful loop here, because later I'll show you the Stoic method called the 3 questions that can turn any fear, in real time, into calm clarity. But before that, let's explore what happens when you start applying these principles consistently. Something begins to shift inside you. The things that once triggered you start to feel lighter. The people who once intimidated you lose their grip. You stop being reactive. You become reflective. You walk into stressful meetings with composure. You face rejection with curiosity instead of pain. You handle uncertainty with quiet confidence. This isn't magic, it's mental conditioning. Here's a true modern story. In 2019, a young entrepreneur lost everything when his company collapsed. Investors pulled out, his co-founders quit, and he was left with debt and humiliation. Most people would have disappeared in shame. Instead, he turned to Stoic philosophy. Every morning, he journaled 3 lines. What's within my control? What meaning can I assign to this fear? And how can I love this fate? Within a year, he started again, wiser, calmer, sharper. That second company was not successful because of luck, but because he had become emotionally bulletproof. When fear showed up, he greeted it like an old friend. That's what living Stoicism looks like in the 21st century. It's not ancient, it's armor. And here's something fascinating. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that when you reframe stress as challenge rather than threat, your body releases growth hormones instead of stress hormones. You literally change your biology with your mindset. Stoicism is not just ancient wisdom, it's emotional neuroscience written in Roman ink. Marcus Aurelius didn't have fMRI scans, but he knew this truth. Our life is what our thoughts make it. If your thoughts are disciplined, your life becomes unshakable. Let's get more personal. Maybe you're struggling with anxiety about the future, your career, your health, your purpose. Ask yourself, is this fear about something I can control? If yes, act. If no, release. That's principle 1. Then ask, what meaning am I assigning to this fear? Maybe you're calling it doom when it's actually direction. That's principle 2. And finally, can I love this as part of my journey? That's principle 3. These questions pull you out of panic and into power. Because the opposite of fear isn't bravery, it's clarity. Now, here's the most unexpected part. When you start living this way, people feel it. Your energy changes. You become the calm one in every storm, the grounded friend everyone turns to, the colleague who never loses composure, the person who radiates quiet confidence. That's the hidden influence of Stoicism. It doesn't just make you fearless, it makes you magnetic. People trust those who are not ruled by fear. They sense stability in you. And in a chaotic world, stability is irresistible. But let's not close the circle yet, because there's one more layer to this transformation, something the Stoics rarely said directly, but lived every day. It's the idea that fearlessness isn't the goal. The goal is freedom. Freedom from external control, from internal chaos, from the tyranny of your emotions. And in the next part, we'll go even deeper. We'll talk about how to maintain this freedom daily, even when the world tries to drag you back into fear.
Let's imagine something. You wake up tomorrow morning, but instead of immediately grabbing your phone, you sit still for 60 seconds. You take one deep breath and say silently, "Today, I will control only what's mine to control. I will perceive wisely. I will love whatever happens." That's it. Just a minute of stoic clarity before the chaos begins. What you've done in that single moment is revolutionary. You've interrupted the modern cycle of reactivity, and you've chosen awareness over autopilot. That's how real strength begins, not in grand gestures, but in quiet decisions. Every Stoic warrior had a ritual. Marcus Aurelius had his morning meditations. Seneca wrote letters to himself every night. Epictetus taught his students to review each day as if standing before a judge. They understood that discipline wasn't about punishing the body, but training the mind. And in today's noisy, dopamine-hacked world, this ritual is more necessary than ever, because your fear thrives in noise. It feeds on your distracted mind. But once you create daily stillness, fear has nowhere to hide. Let's break this into what I call the daily Stoic code. 3 micro practices that, if repeated, make fear dissolve over time. 1. The morning command. I choose my response. Before the world throws its demands at you, you set the tone. You decide that no matter what happens today, the traffic, the argument, the email, the loss, you will remain calm and deliberate. This isn't denial, it's discipline. You are programming your mind to expect challenges, not be shocked by them. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils. When you expect discomfort, fear loses its bite. The anxious modern person says, "I hope nothing bad happens." The Stoic says, "When it happens, I will meet it well." Number 2, the midday pause. Is this within my control? Here's the test. When you feel frustration bubbling at work, in traffic, in conversation, take one deep breath and ask that single question.
99% of your mental suffering dissolves in that moment. It's astonishing how much fear is born from trying to control things that were never yours. People's opinions, outcomes, timing. Once you realize how small your circle of control actually is, you begin to experience an unexpected side effect: freedom. And third, the night reflection. Did I live according to my nature? Seneca used to write that every night before sleeping, he replayed his day like a film. Where did I lose my temper? Where did I waste time? Where did I rise above fear? And then he would forgive himself and plan improvement. This nightly ritual isn't about guilt, it's about awareness. It trains your mind to see fear as data, not destiny, because fear that is seen clearly loses its power. Now, imagine doing this for 30 days. You'd start to notice something fascinating. Your emotional baseline changes. You become less reactive. Your body stays calm in situations that used to make your heart race. You begin to feel lighter. That's not coincidence. That's neuroplasticity. Every repetition of calm rewires your brain's fear centers. Modern neuroscience calls it top-down emotional regulation. The Stoics called it living according to reason. Different language, same truth. Let's make this personal. Think of the last time fear made you freeze. Maybe before a big opportunity, a difficult conversation, or a new step in your life. What stopped you wasn't the event itself. It was your interpretation of it. The mind whispered, "What if I fail? What will people think?" But what if you replaced that whisper with a Stoic question? Is this in my control? Instantly, the fog clears. You can act or you can let go. Either way, fear loses its grip. This is not theory. This is training. And here's the paradox the Stoics mastered. The more you face fear intentionally, the less fear exists. Marcus Aurelius practiced this through voluntary discomfort. He'd sleep on the floor sometimes, eat plain food, walk in cold weather. Why? To remind himself that comfort is optional and resilience is built. In our age, this might look like taking cold showers, speaking up when you'd rather stay silent, or choosing digital silence for a day. Each small act tells your brain, I can handle this. And slowly, fear becomes respect for your own strength. Let's open a loop here because in a few moments, I'll show you a forgotten Stoic visualization exercise that rewires your brain's response to fear in real time. But first, I want you to grasp something essential. Discipline is not restriction, it's liberation. When you live by the Stoic code, you start to feel free, not trapped. You stop being a puppet of impulses. You stop running from pain and start walking through it with clarity. The world around you may still be chaotic, the economy unstable, people unpredictable, outcomes uncertain. But you are no longer tossed by every wave. You become the captain of your inner ship. And when that happens, an interesting phenomenon unfolds. Life starts cooperating with you. Because the moment you stop resisting reality, reality starts aligning with your peace. But here's what most people miss. Fear will always try to return. It's biological. It's part of the human experience. The Stoics never promised a fear-free life. They promised fear mastery. And mastery means you see fear coming. You smile and you say, my old friend, let's see what you've come to teach me today. That is emotional invincibility. In a world where everyone is reacting, panicking, and running, you walk, you breathe, you think, you act. That calmness is your superpower, and it's contagious. The Stoic doesn't need to preach. Their presence alone teaches. Now, in the next part, we'll go even deeper into the hidden Stoic method that ancient philosophers used before battles, disasters, and loss. A mental rehearsal technique so powerful that even modern psychologists use it today to train soldiers and high-performance athletes. It's called negative visualization, and it's the secret to eliminating fear before it ever takes hold.
There's a story about Marcus Aurelius that few people know, One winter evening, he stood alone on the walls of a Roman fort. The empire was under threat. His health was failing, and betrayal lingered in the shadows of his court. A soldier approached and asked, "Do you ever feel fear, my emperor?" Marcus looked out at the dark horizon and said, "I imagine everything that could happen: loss, pain, death, and I make peace with it before it arrives. That is how I rule without fear." That practice was negative visualization. This single exercise, hidden in Stoic teachings, has the power to dissolve anxiety faster than almost anything else. And yet, most people misunderstand it. They think imagining worst-case scenarios will make them negative. But the truth is the opposite. The Stoics believe that by facing your fears in your mind before they happen, you remove their power to paralyze you when they do. It's not about expecting doom. It's about training for life. Let's make this practical. Imagine tomorrow you lose your job. Most people's minds spiral into panic. What will I do? How will I survive? But the Stoic sits down, breathes deeply, and visualizes it happening calmly. They imagine the shock, the uncertainty, the discomfort, and then they imagine themselves adapting, calling a friend, finding opportunities, simplifying life. In doing so, they train the brain to respond with composure, not chaos. Because when the mind rehearses peace, fear loses its sting. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient wisdom. Studies from Stanford show that mental rehearsal activates the same neural circuits as real experiences. When athletes visualize performing under pressure, their bodies respond as if they've already done it. Stoics were the first mental athletes. Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus practiced these visualizations daily, not to suffer, but to strengthen. Seneca wrote, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand." In other words, fear can't surprise a prepared mind. Try this tonight. Close your eyes. Imagine losing something you value, your job, your possessions, your comfort. Feel the fear for a few seconds. Then breathe and say, "Even then, I remain myself." That phrase is ancient Stoic power condensed into 6 words. Because what they discovered is this: when you mentally accept the loss of external things, you rediscover the one thing that cannot be lost: your inner self. That's why Stoics were fearless, not because they denied fear, but because they faced it before life forced them to. Let's open a psychological loop here, because in a moment, I'll share a modern example that proves how this ancient visualization can transform real-world anxiety into unshakable courage. But first, understand this: negative visualization is not pessimism, it's preparation. When you imagine challenges, you're not summoning suffering, you're summoning strength. You're saying to the universe, "I'm ready for whatever you send." And ironically, this readiness brings peace. Here's that modern story. A professional pilot once told me how Stoicism saved his mind. Before every flight, he visualized the worst: engine failure, turbulence, even emergency landings. He imagined his body staying calm, his voice steady, his decisions precise. Because of that mental training, when a real engine failure happened mid-air, he reacted with complete composure. No panic, no hesitation. He landed the plane safely. Later, when asked how he stayed calm, he said, "I already lived it once in my mind." That's Stoic power in motion. Fear thrives in uncertainty. When the mind doesn't know what to expect, it panics. But when you've rehearsed your response to loss, failure, and pain, the unknown becomes manageable. You've already seen the movie, and you've already chosen how to act. You become the author, not the victim. The Stoic realizes that reality cannot take more from you than your imagination has already surrendered. So when life tests you, you meet it like an old friend.
There's another layer to this that the Stoics understood intuitively, and modern psychology now confirms. When you imagine losing something, you unconsciously deepen your gratitude for having it. Visualizing loss enhances appreciation. That's why Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." Every visualization of loss strengthens the value of presence. You stop taking life for granted and start living more fully. Let's apply this in modern context. Picture your daily stressors: your phone dying, losing Wi-Fi, being criticized online, financial pressure. Each of these can trigger panic in a modern mind. But practice this. Visualize it before it happens. See yourself calm, collected, breathing. Notice how small the disaster becomes once your mind is prepared. You're not removing discomfort, you're removing shock. And it's shock, not pain, that breaks most people. The Stoic removes the shock. Now here's a fascinating twist. Elite military units, astronauts, and surgeons use this exact principle today under different names: stress inoculation, scenario rehearsal, pre-performance visualization. They are all modern translations of Stoic preparation. The Stoics were 2,000 years ahead of neuroscience. They built minds that could face death, loss, and uncertainty and remain free. Imagine combining this with the previous principles. You control what you can, you interpret events with reason, you love your fate, and now you train your mind to expect difficulty before it arrives. That's not just mental toughness, that's psychological invincibility. Fear becomes irrelevant because you've already walked through every version of it in your mind and survived. But before we close this loop, let me give you a small but powerful exercise called the Stoic Drill. Every morning, ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen today? How would I handle it with strength? What attitude would I choose? That's it. Simple but profound. Because the mind trained to expect storms no longer dreads the clouds. And here's the deeper secret Marcus Aurelius lived by. Fear isn't the enemy. Attachment is. The more you cling to comfort, possessions, approval, or outcomes, the more fear controls you. But when you practice letting go, even in imagination, fear dissolves. That's the paradox of life. Only the one who accepts loss can never truly lose. So, let's keep this loop open, because next we'll explore the final evolution of Stoic fear mastery. It's the state Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus all reached: the ability to walk through chaos, betrayal, and even death with serenity. A level of peace so profound that nothing external could disturb it. We'll call it the Stoic state of invincibility, and it's the final key to fearing nothing in life.
Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of a storm. The sky is dark, the wind howls, rain lashes your face. Everyone around you is running for cover, panicked, shouting, desperate to escape. But you stand still. Your clothes are soaked, your heart is steady, your eyes fixed on the horizon. You're not fearless because the storm isn't real. You're fearless because you've trained your mind to see clearly through it. That's what the Stoics called apatheia, the state of being unshaken, not by denial, but by mastery. It's the final form of Stoic strength, invincibility of spirit. Marcus Aurelius reached this state through relentless self-discipline. Every morning, he reminded himself, "You will meet the ungrateful, the arrogant, the deceitful, the envious, but they cannot harm you unless you allow them to." He didn't write those words for philosophy students, he wrote them for himself as a Roman emperor surrounded by betrayal, war, and sickness. Yet through all of it, he stayed calm. Why? Because he realized that real power doesn't come from controlling the world, it comes from controlling your response to it. Seneca, too, lived this principle in brutal circumstances.
When ordered by Emperor Nero to take his own life, Seneca didn't panic. He simply accepted it as his fate, gave a final philosophical lesson to his students, and opened his veins in peace. To most, that sounds terrifying. To a Stoic, it was freedom. Because Seneca understood that nothing external can touch a free mind. The body can be taken, fortune can be lost, reputation destroyed, but the ability to choose your attitude is forever yours. Let's pause here for a moment, because this realization changes everything. Once you grasp that your peace is internal, not external, fear loses its roots. You become untouchable, not because life becomes easier, but because your inner architecture becomes unshakable. It's like switching from being a leaf tossed by the wind to being the mountain that wind can't move. Fear can blow around you, but it no longer defines you. Modern psychology has a term for this: internal locus of control. It means you believe that your life's outcomes are determined by your actions and mindset, not by luck or external circumstances. Research shows that people with a strong internal locus of control experience less anxiety, recover faster from trauma, and perform better under stress. The Stoics knew this 2,000 years ago. They just used different words. The chief task in life, Epictetus said, is to separate matters into those that are within our control and those that are not. Once you live by that, fear fades because you stop wasting energy on what you can't command. Let's make it personal. Maybe right now you're facing something that scares you: a diagnosis, a breakup, financial pressure, an uncertain future. You feel that tension in your chest, that voice whispering, "What if I can't handle it?" But stop, breathe, ask yourself, what's truly mine in this situation? You'll realize something profound. Fear is always rooted in illusion. It thrives when your mind clings to control it doesn't have. When you release that grip and return to the present moment, clarity returns. Let's open a small loop here, because in a few moments I'll reveal a Stoic paradox that explains why even fear itself can become your greatest teacher. But for now, focus on this image. You wake up each morning with the same chaos in the world: bills to pay, people to deal with, problems unsolved. But you carry something others don't: an unbothered core. You smile when others panic, you act when others freeze, you see opportunities where others see obstacles. That's the Stoic state of invincibility. You see, fear feeds on identity. When you define yourself by things outside your control, your job, your possessions, your reputation, fear always has leverage over you. But when you anchor your identity to something internal, your values, your discipline, your reasoning, fear loses access. This is why the Stoics practice detachment, not to become emotionless, but to become emotionally sovereign. Detachment doesn't mean apathy. It means choosing peace over panic. Epictetus taught that we should carry ourselves like actors in a play. You don't control your role, but you control how you perform it. Some get short roles, others long ones. Some are cast as kings, others as beggars. The wise actor doesn't complain about the script. He gives his best performance no matter the part. That's life through the Stoic lens. Play your role well, then exit when your time comes, without fear, without regret. Now think about modern society. Most people are prisoners of perception, constantly reacting to what others think, chasing validation, fearing rejection. But the Stoic, he's free even in chains, because his mind belongs only to him. The opinions of others are like echoes in a cave. They can sound loud, but they're hollow. Once you stop measuring your worth through other people's eyes, you step into real strength. That's why the Stoic walks differently: grounded, deliberate, calm. And here's where the paradox unfolds. The moment you stop fearing loss, you start living fully. When nothing can be taken from you internally, everything external becomes a gift, not a guarantee. You appreciate relationships, success, and health deeply, but you don't cling. That's love without fear. That's ambition without anxiety. That's life without chains. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." It's the simplest line, yet the entire blueprint for fearlessness hides inside it. When your mind becomes your kingdom, life stops feeling like a battlefield. It becomes a practice, one that you can master, refine, and even enjoy.
There's something almost poetic about the fact that the very emotion we spend our lives running from, fear, is often the one thing trying to point us back to ourselves. The Stoics understood this before modern psychology had words for it. They saw fear not as a curse, but as a compass. Fear shows you exactly where your growth lies. The places you fear to go, the conversations, the decisions, the changes, are usually the places that hold your freedom. And once you understand this paradox, you stop seeing fear as the enemy. You start seeing it as the instructor you've ignored your whole life. Let's begin with a question Marcus Aurelius once asked himself. If something is frightening because it might happen, why is it not also frightening because it might not? That's his way of saying, fear is imagination turned against you. The mind creates scenarios that haven't happened, reacts as if they're real, and punishes you for its own stories. But what if you turn that same imagination into a tool for strength? That's the Stoic paradox. You defeat fear not by fighting it, but by facing it so completely that it becomes your ally. Let's make this real. Think of a moment you hesitated. To start something, to say something, to walk away from something. That moment of hesitation wasn't random. It was your mind whispering, "There's something here I don't yet control." That's not weakness, it's information. It's the mind's way of showing you your edge. The Stoic doesn't run from that whisper, he listens to it. He asks, what is this fear trying to teach me? For example, fear of rejection teaches you that your sense of worth is still outsourced to others. Fear of failure shows you where your self-belief still depends on outcomes. Fear of loss teaches you how tightly you're gripping things that were never truly yours. Each fear is a mirror, and the reflection it shows is the area of life you haven't yet mastered. So the next time fear rises in your chest, don't suppress it, study it. That's what Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus all did. They made fear their philosophy. Let's open a loop here, because soon I'll show you a method the Stoics used to turn fear into wisdom within seconds. But before that, let's explore something deeper. Fear's hidden language. Every fear says one of two things. I might lose something, or I might not be enough. That's it. Strip every anxiety to its bones and you'll find one of those two roots, and both are illusions. You can't lose what you never controlled, and you are always enough because your worth isn't conditional. Once you understand that, fear starts to lose its vocabulary. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient truth. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, activates when you perceive threat or uncertainty. But studies show that labeling your fear, literally saying, I am feeling fear right now, reduces amygdala activity and activates the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thought. In other words, awareness transforms reaction into control. That's exactly what the Stoics practiced through journaling, reflection, and reason. When you name the fear, you reclaim the driver's seat. There's a story about Epictetus that captures this perfectly. Once, during a lecture, someone mocked him for being a cripple, reminding him that he was once a slave whose leg had been broken by his master. Epictetus simply smiled and said, "You can break my leg again, if you wish, but you cannot break my will." Think about that. A man who had every reason to fear pain, humiliation, and loss had none, because he had redefined what was truly his. His body could be harmed, his mind could not. That's what happens when you use fear as a teacher. It points you back to what can't be taken. Here's a modern parallel. A firefighter once said in an interview, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important." That's pure Stoicism. The Stoics didn't seek to erase fear. They sought to align it, to use it as a signal for value. If you fear losing someone,
it's because you love. If you fear failing, it's because you care. The key isn't to destroy fear, but to understand it and then choose your response consciously. Let's go even deeper. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down. Your body tenses. Your breath shortens. Your mind says, "Step back." But then you realize you're not in danger. You're simply aware of height. That's not fear. That's awareness misinterpreted. The Stoics taught that most fears are like that, sensations mistaken for threats. When you pause, observe, and reason, the illusion breaks. You don't have to fight the feeling. You just have to see through it. Now here's that Stoic method I mentioned earlier, what I call the pause of power. When fear strikes, don't react. Breathe deeply and ask 3 questions. Is this within my control? What story am I telling myself about this? And what would the wise version of me do right now? This simple ritual rewires your brain's default response from panic to power. It's not theory. It's a microdose of Stoic mastery that can change your day instantly. Over time, it changes your life. And here's the beauty of it. When you start practicing this, something incredible happens. Fear starts to lose its disguise. You begin to realize that fear is often excitement in disguise, the trembling before transformation. The Stoics understood this energetically. They didn't just aim to suppress emotions, they transmuted them. They turned fear into readiness, anger into clarity, pain into purpose. Every emotion became raw material for growth. So maybe the question isn't, how do I stop feeling fear? But rather, how do I learn from it? Because fear, once understood, becomes the map to your highest self. It tells you where you need courage, where you still cling, and where you still hide. And if you follow it, not blindly, but bravely, it leads you to freedom. But we're not done yet, because in the final part, the grand conclusion, we'll close all these loops. You'll see how control, perception, and amor fati merge into one living force, a way of being so unshakable that fear itself bows in respect. This is where Stoicism stops being philosophy and becomes destiny.
There's a moment, somewhere between silence and realization, when everything you've learned about fear suddenly collapses into clarity. You realize fear never lived in the world, it lived in you. And when you master yourself, the world loses its power to shake you. This is where the 3 Stoic principles, control, perception, and amor fati, fuse into something eternal. Not a philosophy, but a way of being, a state of calm so unbreakable that even chaos seems to respect it. Let's close the first loop, control. When you finally accept what is within your control and what is not, you stop swimming against life. You stop arguing with reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Think about it. Most people spend their lives trying to control things they never could. People, opinions, outcomes, time. And in doing so, they lose control of the one thing they always had, themselves. But the Stoic flips that equation. They master the controllable, their thoughts, their actions, their responses. And by doing so, they find freedom inside every storm. Next, perception. You remember now that nothing is inherently good or bad, it's only our interpretation that decides. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The modern mind suffers the same way. We invent catastrophes in our heads, argue with ghosts of the future, and then wonder why we feel exhausted. But perception, once trained, becomes armor. The Stoic doesn't see tragedy, he sees training. He doesn't see failure, he sees feedback. He doesn't see chaos, he sees context.
And the world bends differently for a mind that perceives clearly, because perception shapes your experience, and experience shapes your reality. And finally, amor fati, the art of loving fate. Not tolerating it, not surviving it, loving it. The Stoic sees every event, good or bad, as part of a larger pattern too complex to judge in the moment. Nietzsche called this the ultimate test of strength, to look at everything that's ever happened and say, I want it again. When you reach that level, fear evaporates. Because how can you fear what you've already accepted? How can life hurt you when you've already chosen to love every outcome it brings? Amor fati is not surrender, it's transcendence. Here's a story to make it real. During the Great Fire of Rome, as flames devoured entire districts, Marcus Aurelius didn't curse fate. He simply wrote in his journal, "What stands in the way becomes the way." He knew the fire could burn the city, but not his character. Seneca, who lost everything in exile, said, "A great man can be robbed of anything except one thing, his choice to remain great." Epictetus, once a slave, turned his chains into a philosophy that outlived empires. These men didn't just study Stoicism, they embodied it. They faced fear, loss, humiliation, and death, and yet remained unbroken. And maybe this is what it really means to be fearless. Not to walk through life unafraid, but to walk through fear untouched. The Stoic doesn't deny emotion, he transcends it. He feels deeply, but decides wisely. He suffers, but doesn't surrender meaning. He loses, but never loses himself. That's the essence of fearlessness. Not a shield, but a stance. Not escape, but understanding. Now let's close the final open loop. Earlier, we talked about the pause of power, that moment between stimulus and response where your freedom lives. Here's the full circle. Every time you practice that pause, you are training the 3 Stoic principles at once. You recognize control. What can I change? You refine perception. What story am I telling? And you practice amor fati. Can I love this as it is? That single pause becomes the hinge of destiny. The more you use it, the less fear controls you, until one day you realize you've become the calm in every storm. And here's the secret Stoics never wrote plainly. Fear doesn't disappear through strength, it disappears through understanding. Once you understand fear, you see it for what it is, a wave. You can't stop it, but you can surf it. Life will keep throwing you waves, uncertainty, pain, loss, endings, but you will keep standing taller, steadier, wiser. That's the Stoic way. To live not in denial of chaos, but in harmony with it. Look around you. The world today is louder, faster, more uncertain than ever before. People chase pleasure, comfort, and validation, but they still feel empty. They scroll through distraction, seeking calm, but never find it. Yet somewhere, quietly, there's a person walking slowly through the noise, calm and centered. That person doesn't react to insults, doesn't chase trends, doesn't panic when things fall apart. Why? Because they've built something inside that the world can't touch. That's Stoicism. That's the unshakable mind. And maybe that person could be you. Because fearlessness isn't a gift, it's a practice. Every time you let go of what you can't control, every time you choose perception over panic, every time you whisper amor fati when things fall apart, you're becoming that person. You're building the discipline, the calm, and the wisdom that no one can manipulate, break, or take. So here's the final question, one that only you can answer. When life tests you next, will you run from fear, or will you walk through it like a Stoic? Because in the end, it's not the world that makes you afraid, it's your thoughts about it. And once you master those thoughts, you master your life. You become, as Marcus Aurelius once wrote, like the rock against which the waves break, unmoved and standing firm.